The night Joy pressed record on her phone, she had no idea she was about to bring down a man an entire estate was too afraid to touch. Picture this: a knock on the door. Soft, almost gentle, the kind of knock that doesn't sound like danger until you know exactly who's standing on the other side of it. Joy stood frozen for a second, her heart hammering against her ribs, and then she did something that would change everything. She smiled. She opened the door, and she let the wolf walk right into her home, believing he was the one setting the trap.
Before we go further, if stories like this, stories about courage hiding in silence, about the quiet ones who turn out to be the strongest in the room, if that's the kind of story that grips you, hit that subscribe button right now, because trust me, you don't want to miss where this one goes. Now let's rewind. Let's go back to the beginning, back before Joy ever set foot in that estate, back when Mr. Kingsley was still just Mr. Kingsley, the landlord everybody loved.
You have to understand something about compounds like his. In a city where rent eats half your salary before it even lands in your account, finding a good landlord is like finding gold. And on the surface, Kingsley was gold. Clean estate, working streetlights, security men who actually stayed awake at their posts. He fixed leaking pipes without you begging him for 3 months. He greeted the children by name. He remembered whose mother was sick and whose child just wrote WAEC. The elderly women in the compound adored him. That Kingsley, Mama Grace would say, fanning herself on her veranda. God bless him. Where will you find another landlord like this one? And people nodded. People believed her. Why wouldn't they? They gave them every reason to. But here's the thing about reputation. It's built in public and it's guarded in silence. And in that estate, there was a silence so heavy, so deliberate that it had become its own kind of architecture, as real as the gates, as real as the walls. Because behind the smiles, behind the freshly painted fences and the well-swept compound, there was a debt that some women were forced to pay in a currency that had nothing to do with money. You see, whenever a female tenant fell behind on her rent, and in this economy, who hasn't? Kingsley would come, not with threats, not with shouting. He was too smart for that. He would come with that same gentle knock, that same warm voice, and he would offer her another way. Some of these women were young, fresh out of school, trying to stand on their own 2 feet for the first time. Some were widows carrying the full weight of a household that used to have 2 hands and now only had theirs. Some were divorced mothers, women who had already survived one storm and thought they'd finally found calm water. They hadn't. Because Kingsley had learned something dark about human desperation. He had learned that fear doesn't need to shout. It only needs to knock, softly, patiently, again and again, until you open the door out of sheer exhaustion. And so for years, this went on. Women who lived alone learned to dread the sound of footsteps outside their doors after dark. They learned to check the date on their rent receipts with more anxiety than they checked their own bank alerts. They learned the particular terror of watching a due date approach like a slow, unstoppable tide. And they kept quiet. Not because they were weak, don't ever say that. Not because they didn't want to fight, but because every single one of them understood the same brutal math. Refuse him, and you don't just lose an apartment. You lose your address, your stability, sometimes your reputation, because Kingsley was clever enough to twist stories before the women ever got the chance to tell their own. So imagine that. Imagine an entire community of women living side by side, suffering the exact same nightmare, and never speaking a single word of it to each other. Passing each other in the compound, smiling, saying good morning, carrying the same secret weight, and thinking they carried it alone. That was the world Joy walked into. She didn't know any of this, of course. All she knew was that she had finally found an apartment she could barely afford, but was determined to make work. She was the kind of woman who didn't wait for life to hand her anything. She went out and took it, piece by piece, with her own two hands. Independent, sharp-minded, the kind of woman who reads a contract twice before signing it, who asks questions other people are too shy to ask. She'd heard whispers, sure. That landlord, oh, he's strict, oh. Don't play with your rent for that man. But strict, she could handle strict. She had no idea strict was a costume worn over something far uglier. And here's where it gets interesting. Because Kingsley didn't come for Joy the way he came for the others, not at first. He noticed her. He'd see her walking to her car in the morning, sharp and composed, and something in him sat up straighter. He started finding little reasons to be near her. Ah, Joy, good morning, oh, how was your night? He'd offer to help carry things she didn't need help carrying. He fixed a loose door hinge in her apartment before she even reported it. He smiled a little too long, lingered a little too close. She noticed it too, if we're being honest, but she brushed it off the way many women learn to brush off things that make them uncomfortable, telling herself she was overthinking, telling herself he was just being a friendly landlord, telling herself not every kindness hides a hook. Then her salary got delayed. It happens, doesn't it? 1 month, the company has cash flow issues. 1 month, the alert just doesn't come. And suddenly, a woman who has always paid her rent on time is staring at a due date she cannot meet, feeling that familiar knot tighten in her stomach. Joy wasn't panicking though, not really. She had a plan. She'd explained the situation, ask for 2 weeks. Any reasonable landlord would understand that salaries sometimes come late. It wasn't her fault, and she had every intention of paying in full the moment the alert hit her account. She had no idea Kingsley didn't want her money. That evening, there was a knock on her door. Soft, almost gentle. She opened it, and there he was, Mr. Kingsley, in his crisp agbada, that same warm smile stretched across his face, the smile that had fooled an entire compound for years. Joy, good evening, he said, stepping in like a man who owned not just the building, but everyone inside it. Your rent is overdue, he had. Yes, sir, she said carefully. My salary was delayed this month. I promise, the moment it comes. He raised his hand, cutting her off gently, almost affectionately. No, don't worry yourself about that. He lowered his voice, leaned in slightly, and let his true face peek out from behind the mask for just a moment. There are other ways you can settle what you owe me, ways that don't involve money at all. And there it was. Joy understood immediately. The air in the room changed. Every warning bell in her body screamed at once. This wasn't a landlord being generous. This was a predator, comfortable, confident, standing in her living room like he'd done this 100 times before. Because he had. Now, most of us, if we're honest, would have reacted the way our instincts scream at us to react. Disgust, anger, slam the door, maybe even shout, make a scene, let the whole compound hear what kind of man Kingsley really was. But Joy did something else, something that took a kind of courage that doesn't look like courage at first glance. She smiled. She let a pause hang in the air, just long enough, and then she said, softly, let me think about it. Kingsley's eyebrows lifted, surprised, delighted even. He hadn't expected her to consider it so quickly. Most women fought a little first, cried a little first, before they broke. Joy skipped straight to consideration. He should have found that strange. He didn't, because arrogance has a way of blinding a man to the very things that should terrify him most. He left that night believing he had found another easy conquest. What he didn't know What he could never have imagined was that the moment he walked out of her door, Joy wasn't crying into a pillow. She wasn't calling a friend to break down in fear. She was thinking, calculating, planning. Because Joy had decided something in that exact moment. Standing in her own living room with her heart still pounding, she was not going to be his next victim. She was going to be his downfall. Now here's something you need to understand about a man like Kingsley. Men like him don't just want power. They want to be believed in that power. They want an audience, even if that audience is just one frightened woman nodding along to their stories. And Joy understood that instinct better than he understood it himself. So she let him talk. The next time he came, and he came again, of course he came again, drawn back like a moth that thinks it's found a particularly obedient flame. Joy was ready. She had already started quietly, carefully, recording every conversation on her phone, tucked innocently on a shelf, in a bag, wherever it wouldn't draw suspicion. She asked him questions, innocent-sounding questions, the kind of questions that seem like curiosity but are really doors, cracked open just enough to let the truth spill through. Have other tenants struggled the way I'm struggling? She asked one evening, her voice soft, uncertain, playing the part of a woman being slowly convinced. Kingsley chuckled, actually chuckled, and settled into her sofa like he owned it, like he owned everything. Joy, you have no idea, he said, shaking his head, almost nostalgic. So many women have passed through this estate. Beautiful women, struggling women. You'd be surprised how fast fear makes a person reasonable. Reasonable how? She pressed gently. You know, he said, waving a hand, when a woman is about to lose her home, when she has nowhere else to go, she becomes cooperative. I've never had to force anyone, never. They come around on their own. That's the beauty of it. Joy kept her face still, kept her voice soft, kept her soft voice open. And they never told anyone, she pressed. He laughed again, louder this time, more confident. Tell who? Tell the same neighbors who will gossip about them instead of helping them. No. They keep quiet. They always keep quiet. Because at the end of the day, everybody just wants to keep their roof over their head. Every word he spoke, Joy let breathe in the room a little longer. She didn't flinch. She didn't judge, not out loud anyway. She let him believe that his confessions were seduction, that his boasting was charm, that she was slowly, steadily falling under whatever spell he thought he was casting. And the more she listened without recoiling, the more careless he became. He told her about a young graduate who cried the entire time and begged him never to tell anyone. And he laughed telling it. Actually laughed, like it was some fond memory instead of a wound he'd carved into another human being. He told her about a widow who threatened to report him and how he reminded her calmly that it would be her word versus his, and whose word do you think carries more weight in this town, a struggling widow's or a respected landlord's? He told her, without a single flicker of shame, exactly how he had built his little kingdom of silence, one frightened woman at a time. He believed he was impressing her. He believed she was slowly surrendering, the way the others had surrendered. He believed, with the kind of arrogance that only comes from years of getting away with something, that his reputation would protect him forever. That no one would ever believe a young tenant over an established, respected landlord. That the walls of his estate were also the walls of his immunity. He had absolutely no idea that every single word, every laugh, every confession, every detail of every woman he'd broken was being captured, saved, backed up in 3 different places, waiting for Joy to decide it was time. And let me tell you, patience like that isn't easy. Every single day that Joy had to smile at this man, had to nod along to his stories, had to sit across from him and hide the disgust boiling under her skin, that took something out of her. Don't think for a second this was easy. It wasn't. Performance without cost. Every conversation left her hands shaking the moment he walked out the door. Every laugh she forced herself to give him felt like swallowing glass. But she thought about the other women, the ones who never got the chance to fight back, the ones still living in that estate right now, keeping the same secret, carrying the same fear behind the same polite smiles. And that thought was enough to keep her going. She started paying closer attention to the compound, watching, listening. She noticed things she hadn't noticed before. The way a young widow in Block C flinched whenever Kingsley's car pulled into the compound. The way a divorced mother in Block A always seemed to disappear indoors right around the time rent was due. The way certain women avoided being alone anywhere near the landlord's office. These weren't coincidences. These were survival patterns, habits carved by fear. So Joy began, quietly, carefully, to reach out. She didn't storm into anyone's apartment demanding they confess their trauma to a near stranger. She was gentler than that. She started with small conversations. A shared pot of soup here, a borrowed cup of sugar there. She built trust the way trust is actually built, slowly, patiently, with consistency. And one evening, sitting with a young widow named Chidinma on her small veranda, watching the sun dip behind the estate wall, Joy asked her, carefully, "Has Kingsley ever made you uncomfortable about rent?" Chidinma went very, very still. For a long moment, she said nothing. Joy didn't push. She just waited, the way you wait for a frightened animal to decide whether or not it trusts you enough to come closer. Then Chidema's eyes filled with tears and she whispered, "How did you know?" And just like that, a door that had been locked shut for years creaked open. Chidema told her everything. About the first knock on her door after her husband's death, when she was still raw with grief and drowning in unfamiliar bills. About how Kingsley had come, so gentle, so understanding on the surface, and how that gentleness had turned into something that still made her stomach turn every time she thought about it. About the shame that kept her silent, the fear that kept her paying a debt that had nothing to do with Naira and Kobo. Joy held her hand and let her cry. And when Chidema finally looked up and asked, "Are you going to tell people?" Joy simply said, "Not yet, but soon. And when I do, you won't be standing alone." One by one, quietly, carefully, Joy found them. The young graduate, the divorced mother in Block A, 2 more widows, women who had been living side by side for years, suffering the exact same nightmare, never once realizing how many others shared it. When they finally spoke to each other, really spoke, not the polite estate greetings, but the raw, unfiltered truth, something shifted in that compound. You could feel it, even if you couldn't see it. A quiet current of solidarity building beneath the surface, invisible to the one person who should have been most afraid of it. Kingsley never suspected anything. Why would he? To him, Joy was just another conquest, slowly ripening on the vine. He had no idea she had become the axis around which an entire rebellion was quietly turning. Weeks passed. Joy kept recording, kept collecting, kept building her case conversation by conversation, confession by confession, until she had enough evidence to bury a man who had spent years believing he was untouchable. And then, one afternoon, she decided it was time. She gathered the women, all of them, Chidima, the young graduates whose name was Blessing, the divorced mother Ifelma, the widows from the far block, nearly a dozen women in total. Women who had spent years avoiding eye contact with each other over this exact same shared wound, now sitting together in Joy's small living room, united by a truth they'd finally found the courage to speak aloud. "We are not doing this quietly," Joy told them, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "We are doing this in front of everyone, in front of the whole estate. He built his power on our silence, so we're going to take it back the same way he took it, in public." Some of the women were terrified. Of course they were. Years of fear don't just evaporate because one brave woman shows up with a recorded phone and a plan. "What if nobody believes us?" Blessing asked, her voice small. Joy looked at her steadily. "They don't have to believe us. They just have to hear him." That Saturday, the estate held its usual monthly compound meeting. The kind of meeting where tenants gathered near the security post to discuss generator fuel contributions and cleaning schedules and whatever petty disputes had bubbled up that month. Ordinary, routine. The kind of meeting nobody ever expected to become historic. Kingsley arrived the way he always arrived, smiling, greeting everyone by name, basking in the warmth of a reputation he had spent years polishing. He had no idea that today that polish was about to crack wide open. Joy stood up. "Before we continue with the agenda, there's something everyone here needs to hear." Her voice carrying clearly across the compound. Kingsley's face flickered just slightly. "Joy, is there a problem with your apartment?" "No," she said. "There's a problem with you." The compound went quiet. That particular kind of quiet that feels like the air itself is holding its breath. For years, women in this estate have been forced to pay their rent debts with something far more valuable than money: their dignity, their safety. Their silence has been bought with fear of losing their homes. Kingsley's face shifted instantly into practiced outrage. "What nonsense is this?" he snapped, glancing around the gathering crowd, gauging his audience the way he always had, trusting his reputation to do the work for him. "Joy, is this because you couldn't pay your rent last month? You want to destroy my name because of your own financial problems?" "That's exactly what I expected you to say," Joy replied, calmly. "You've said the same thing to every woman who ever tried to speak up before, haven't you?" "This is slander," he said, louder now, his composure cracking at the edges. "I've done nothing but help the people in this estate. Ask anyone here. Ask them how well I treat my tenants." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some tenants nodding in agreement, still loyal to the image he'd built, still trusting the smiling landlord over the young woman making accusations. And that's when Joy pulled out her phone. "Then let's ask you," she said, "in your own words." She pressed play. Kingsley's voice rang out across the compound, clear as day, in unmistakably his own. His laughter, his boasting, his casual, chilling descriptions of the women he had manipulated over the years, spoken with the same ease he might describe a good business deal. "You have no idea how fast fear makes a person reasonable. I've never had to force anyone. They come around on their own. It would be her word against mine, and whose word do you think carries more weight?" The compound fell into a silence so complete you could hear the wind moving through the trees. Kingsley's face drained of color. His mouth opened, then closed. For the first time in years, this man who had always known exactly what to say, exactly how to charm his way out of anything, had absolutely nothing. "That's taken out of context," Kingsley stammered, but his voice had lost all its earlier confidence. It came out small, cornered. "Out of context?" Joy said, her voice rising now, no longer calm and measured, but burning with everything she had swallowed for weeks. You laughed while describing how you broke a grieving widow. You bragged about a graduate who cried and begged you to stop. Explain the context for that, Mr. Kingsley. And then something happened that Kingsley truly did not see coming. Chidima stood up. Her hands were shaking, but her voice when it came was clear. "It's true," she said, looking directly at him, refusing to look away this time. The crowd turned toward her, shock rippling through the gathered tenants. Then Blessing stood. "It did it to me too. My first month here, I was fresh out of school and I didn't know what else to do. Then Ifeoma, then another widow, then another, voices rising from a silence that had been built brick by brick over years, finally breaking apart in the open air." Kingsley stood in his own estate, the estate he had ruled with a smile and a threat hidden behind it, and watched his entire kingdom collapse in real time. The security guards who had always respected him now looked at him with disgust. The elderly women who had once sung his praises now stared at him in horror, realizing how completely they had been fooled. Mama Grace, who called him a gift from God, covered her mouth with her hand, tears welling in her eyes. "Say something," Joy said quietly, watching him. "Tell them it's a lie. Go on." But he couldn't, because everyone had just heard it in his own voice, unmistakable, undeniable. There was no smile clever enough, no charm smooth enough to talk his way out of the truth he himself had recorded. For years, Kingsley believed that his arrogance was armor, that his confidence was untouchable, that no one would ever dare challenge a man so respected, so seemingly generous, so deeply embedded in the trust of an entire community. But arrogance, it turns out, has a fatal flaw. It makes a man careless. It makes him talk when he should stay silent. It makes him boast about things that should have stayed buried forever. And in the end, the very thing Kingsley used to control these women, his belief that he was untouchable, that his word would always outweigh theirs, became the exact weapon that destroyed him. He tried weakly to salvage something. "He sees a misunderstanding," he muttered, backing towards the gate, his eyes darting around at the crowd that had once adored him and now stood as a wall of accusation. I need to speak to my lawyer." "Speak to whoever you want," Joy said, "but everyone here has already heard the truth. And I promise you, this recording isn't staying in this compound." She was right. By the following week, that recording had made its way beyond the estate walls, to local authorities, to a women's advocacy group Joy had quietly contacted weeks earlier, to a community that had grown tired of watching predators hide behind respectability. Kingsley's carefully built reputation, the one he'd spent years polishing like a prized car, crumbled in a matter of days. Some landlords like him find ways to slip through cracks, to buy silence with money or influence. Maybe he tried. Maybe he still is trying somewhere. But something had already changed that could never be undone. The silence that protected him for years was gone, broken beyond repair. And an estate full of women who once flinched at a knock on their door now stood taller, stronger, unwilling to ever be that afraid again. In the weeks that followed, something remarkable happened in that compound, something that had nothing to do with Kingsley at all anymore. The women started talking to each other, not just about what had happened to them, but about everything, their lives, their dreams, their children. The compound that had once been a place of quiet, isolated suffering slowly became something else entirely, a community. Real neighbors finally, instead of strangers sharing walls and secrets. Chidima started a small savings group with some of the other women, pooling resources so that no one would ever again feel trapped by a single overdue rent payment. Blessing, the young graduate, found the courage to apply for a better job, telling Joy later that surviving Kingsley's exposure had taught her that she could survive anything. Ifeoma began mentoring newer, younger tenants who moved into the estate, making sure no one ever again felt alone in a moment of vulnerability. And Joy didn't set out to be anyone's hero. She'll tell you that herself if you ever get the chance to ask her. She was just a woman who refused to be the next name on a list of silenced victims. But in refusing that role for herself, she ended up giving an entire community something far greater than justice against one man. She gave them their voices back. You know, there's a lesson in this story that goes far beyond one landlord and one estate. It's about the danger of mistaking silence for weakness. Kingsley made that mistake for years. He looked at frightened women and saw compliance. He looked at their fear and mistook it for permission. He never once considered that the very silence he depended on could be gathering itself quietly in the shadows, waiting, watching, building toward the exact moment it would no longer be silence at all.
Because sometimes, the person you think you've completely broken, completely intimidated, completely controlled, sometimes that person is simply waiting for the right moment, waiting to gather enough truth, enough courage, enough allies to turn the tables entirely. Power built on fear is never as strong as it looks. It only survives as long as no one dares to test it. And all it takes is one person, one Joy, brave enough to smile when she wants to scream, patient enough to wait when every instinct tells her to run, wise enough to know that the loudest reaction is always not the most powerful one. If there's one thing I want you to carry with you from this story, it's this. Never underestimate the quiet ones. Never assume that silence means surrender. Sometimes, the calmest person in the room is simply choosing their moment. And when that moment comes, everything changes. To every woman out there who has ever felt trapped by fear, who has ever swallowed her pain to keep a roof over her head, who has ever wondered if speaking up would even matter, it matters. Your voice matters. And you are far stronger than the silence anyone has ever tried to force upon you. If this story moved you, touched something in you, made you think about the quiet battles so many people fight behind closed doors, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button, leave a comment and tell me what part of this story stayed with you the most, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Because stories like Joy's don't just deserve to be told once. They deserve to be heard again and again until every estate, every compound, every corner of this world understands one simple truth. Silence protects no one but the guilty. And the truth, no matter how long it's buried, always finds its way to the light.
Before you go, tell me honestly, if you were Joy, would you have stayed quiet and fought back like she did, or run? Drop your answer below. See you in the next one.